My name's Dan Glass. Live in Glasgow, from London originally, and I'm involved with various projects for climate justice.
Can you tell me what you define as climate change activism?
Climate change activism can take on various different forms. I suppose it's people who are taking action to stop runaway climate change and the social inequalities that it causes. There's a whole range of different approaches. You can get lobbying approaches, you can get people using direct action, people who look at kind of surface level, or people who try and get to the root of the problem, people who use different educational methods, people who work with a variety of different communities. So climate change has many different impacts and many different causes. So there's a whole range of different projects to look at in terms of if you want to stop runaway climate change before it gets any worse.
How did you become involved?
How did I become involved? I suppose, well, in the last few years, there's been so much talk and discussion on climate change in the papers, all over the media, community groups, and obviously it's being seen as the biggest threat facing our generation. So I got involved in climate change action maybe like 5 years ago or so, when I saw how serious it was and was just reading stuff in the papers, really. I thought, well, something's got to be done, so I just threw myself into it. Not particularly from like a campaigning background in my family or anything, but I suppose it's obvious that it's happening, and it's obvious that there's a lot of destruction happening because of climate change all over the world. So we're in the belly of the beast in the UK. We can put a spanner in the works.
Is there any particular areas that really interest you or you're really involved in?
Particularly at the moment, climate change, the impacts are moving so fast. A lot of people say that we're beyond the point of mitigation, of stopping the worst from happening, and we've got to go into adaptation, so supporting people who are bearing the brunt of the impacts of climate change, both physically and psychologically. I think psychologically, climate change is something to get your head around, because it's so mad what's going on in society at the moment. The statistics are so harsh, and the predictions about what will happen to the Earth's geography and climate and societies, things are going to change so rapidly. So in order to empower people to take action, there's got to be a lot of strong psychological processes to find some kind of way for people to take action. Otherwise, people will just put their heads in the sand. So I'm particularly interested in the psychological support mechanism to help people take action. I'm also particularly at the moment doing various projects which look at, who's taking action, who has the privilege and the opportunities to take action, and if we need to build a mass movement of people taking action on climate change, we need to tackle the structural barriers which stop people taking action. So, for example, a lot of the time when you see in the press, climate change actions and projects and stuff, you'll see people from a specific demographic of society based a lot on kind of race and class grounds. Because, if a group of young black teenagers, for example, decided to go sit on a runway as Plain Stupid does, the impacts would probably be a lot different. They would get much more than a slap on the wrist. So if we need to build a mass movement to support everyone to take action on climate change, for climate justice, we need to tackle the structural racism in society to be able to help people take action.
You mentioned Plain Stupid. Could you tell the listeners a little bit more about it?
Plain Stupid is a direct action network against the social and environmental impacts of the aviation industry. We've been going for about 5 years doing direct actions to stop emissions at their source, to stop emissions where possible. The reason why we focus on the big industries like the aviation industry is because the government would like us to believe that, we'll stop climate change by changing our light bulbs or by changing our plastic bags, all the while they're making a profit out of expanding the fossil fuel industries. So we'll have no hope in tackling runaway climate change if we don't tackle the big bad bullies such as the aviation industry, who are getting away with absolute, murder, you could say, at the moment, with continuing to expand the industry. That's why we've been focusing on the aviation industry, and also that if it continues to expand in the way that it wants to, it will take up more than the entire carbon budget, the entire UK carbon budget by 2050. So essentially all of our other efforts will be put into the dark if we don't stop the aviation industry from growing.
Dan, could you tell us why you're a climate change activist in Scotland?
For many reasons, I'm a climate change activist in Scotland because, number one, Scotland has a really good opportunity to set the example to the UK and to the rest of the world about living sustainably. We have access and a lot of potential to invest in renewable energy sources, sustainable land transport systems. So setting an example is one thing. The other thing is, if anyone needs any motivation about why the natural world is worth saving and looking after. Scotland is so ecologically rich and beautiful. You don't have to look much further than Loch Lomond to realise that if we don't stop climate change, we'll lose so many beautiful things. Thirdly, because Scotland's climate change bill is a walking contradiction. The government want to have the strongest climate change bill in the world, which is great in theory, but they're not putting their principles and their objectives into practice because, for example, they still want to expand all the airports, all the major airports, and therefore you can't want to have the strongest climate change bill as well as expand the airports. You just can't. It's not scientifically realistic. So to challenge the ultimate walking contradiction that the government policies are having, it's quite enjoyable. If they have such audacious objectives and there's such hypocrisy because the policies don't relate to the objectives, then it's a really good starting point.
What actions have you been involved in that you're most proud of, or could you tell us a little bit about some of the kind of
In
things that you
Scotland,
feel? Yeah, in Scotland would be great.
I suppose one of them was well, there was the Aberdeen Airport occupation, but I think one of the actions which I most enjoyed and I think had a big effect was exposing the police for trying to infiltrate Plain Stupid 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So basically, the police have been trying to, sniff around Plain Stupid and been offering people taking action on climate change with Plain Stupid, been offering people money to, snitch and tell the police and the powers that be all of our plans. And so obviously people in Plain Stupid are so passionate about taking the necessary action to stop climate change and can see that the government isn't doing enough and see that they're not going, see that the police and the government, in a sense, are part of the problem and not going to stop taking action on climate change for their benefit. And so for 2 weeks we recorded everything they were saying through spy equipment, through other technological systems to highlight, the levels of ruthlessness that the police, the minions of the state are willing to go to stop peaceful action and therefore are part of the problem and are perpetuating the structural causes of climate change rather than actually stopping it. So it was a really good story which showed the relationship between the state, the police, and actually who is perpetuating climate change and locking us into a carbon heavy infrastructure. We're just normal people taking action on climate change. We're workers, mums, dads, students, nurses, whatever. We're a whole range of people. We're not the threat. And what that showed is that the government and the powers that be, such as the police, are the threat. And they're the ones stopping positive, healthy action to preserve our future. So rather than just a kind of, which many actions are, you stop pollution, you put your bodies on the line and you show the importance of direct intervention in the fossil fuel industry. I thought it was really important to show the structural problems and the levels that the state will go to in order to stop the necessary action. So I was quite proud of that.
I guess one of the things that climate change activists have been accused of and maybe criticised for, and certainly by the police, that the police might use to justify doing such tactics, is that they maybe feel they're above the law, kind of are prepared to break the law, certainly, to try and achieve their goals. How would you respond to that?
I think sometimes we've got to have a critical analysis and separate the law from morality. Currently the law is set up to benefit big business and business as usual, which is jeopardizing our future and let alone jeopardizing the whole global ecosystem. And the law is a very flexible thing. We've got to look at it with foresight as well. Over 100 years ago, it wasn't legal for women to vote, and people had to break the law, challenge the law to move it on. Same with the civil rights movement. It was, not so long ago, it was illegal for people of different skin colour to have the same right to vote or the same levels of democratic participation, and people had to challenge the law. And that's what we've got to do today. We've got to challenge the unjust laws which benefit business over community health, so that one day it will change. And I think not so long down the line, people will look back and thank us for, taking the necessary action and challenging the law, or condemn us for not doing enough. So, as far as I'm concerned, if the law is benefiting bankers and big business over the planet, then it needs to be challenged. And so I see the law as something which fluctuates and moves and changes in accordance to what the political and environmental needs are of that time. Ideally, the law would encompass environmental rights in a holistic sense, but they don't. So Therefore, the judicial system at the moment is part of the problem rather than the solution, and one day it will change. But without direct action and civil disobedience, it won't.
And finally, what kind of plan? What do you have for the future? Anything you can tell us about?
Well, I'm currently on bail, so actually, been on bail for a long time, banned from airports and power stations. So they're taking my toys away. A lot of what I've been doing over the last year is helping build a movement to support as many people take direct action and engage in civil disobedience, to get to the root of the problem, and to highlight the role of civil disobedience as a healthy thing in a supposed democracy. So I've been building a network of people using direct action and popular education to strive for environmental justice, and environmental justice being the unequal burden of environmental problems on certain parts of society, usually economically marginalised, and black communities as well. So it's really showing the civil liberties on the ground. So building mass networks so people can take mass direct action is what I've been doing. Working with people directly affected who live by airports or coal-fired power stations or motorways, who are bearing the brunt of it, of climate change at the moment, to speak out and to become empowered and to take action. But we've still got a lot of work to do. We've still got a lot of airports to tackle and coal-fired power stations to tackle. So that's my main goal, and the job was not done until all of these dinosaur damaging industries are put to the side, and we've actually seriously invested in healthy, environmentally sustainable alternatives. In the UK, we've set the trend in many ways on climate change activism, and particularly aviation expansion activism, and working with a lot of communities in America at the moment where aviation is not up the political agenda, where a lot of people don't even believe in man-made climate change or human-made climate change. So helping other people in other places build anti-airport expansion movements or climate change movements as well. I mean, whilst I'm on bail and restricted from taking actions myself, part of my goal is to help as many other people take action and become empowered to be in this for the long term.
Like, I guess because it's, you, in some ways you're trying to strive for the local in terms of building community and more kind of localized communities that can kind of rely on themselves, but at the same time you have to first kind of reach globally to make that happen. Would you agree with that?
Well, one benefit of direct action is the communication strategy. It generates a lot of attention when people see in the public eye the levels that people are willing to go to stop disasters such as climate change. So direct actions often open space for communication, and that's everything from kind of publicity stunts or direct interventions, as we've done at various airports. So various actions that we've done have generated a lot of spaces for discussion on what we need to do to tackle climate change, both globally and locally, but which has been a great thing. But what we're doing locally is connecting communities who are on the front line of the problems of climate change. So people by Glasgow Airport, people by Grangemouth Oil Refinery, communities by Green Gares Incinerator, and combating isolationism, because people, when they're living with pollution and poverty and the social impacts of climate change, often become very depressed and desperate at the ignorance which the government is willing to go to at the realities of what people are having to live with. So when people get together, they see that they're bearing the same impacts, and become empowered by saying that actually we can do stuff together. So joining the dots between poverty and racism and climate change, bringing communities together, relying on people's expertise just by living with the realities of climate change and building a movement around that. And I think what we're going to see, across all these communities in Scotland as well as elsewhere, is increasing actions, because climate change isn't just, an issue of like moral righteousness anymore. It's an issue of self-defense. People are dying because of the social impacts of climate change, not just in Bangladesh or in Africa, but by these polluting industries in the UK. And that's why, it is an issue of public health. It is an issue of self-defense, and people are going to start really taking the necessary action.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Dan.
It's all right. Pleasure.